Welcome, everyone, to our Wednesday evening reading of the book of Ecclesiastes from the West Side Church of Christ, although we're not really at the building of the West Side Church of Christ. But we're glad that you have chosen to join us this evening. Hope you had a great fall day. We're going into the second week of school, and I know there was a case today already, case yesterday, but it was announced today from the school in Amherstburg, and so we definitely want to be keeping all of our students in our prayers and praying for our teachers and all those involved with making decisions there, because we do want everyone to be safe, and we want to remind everyone that there are concerns about what's going on in with the pandemic, and even Ontario has had an uptick in cases, and so we're continuing to remember them in prayer. We're reading tonight Ecclesiastes chapter 8. The entire 8th chapter of Ecclesiastes, going to the 6th verse of chapter 9. So we're going to be covering a little bit of ground this evening. We're glad that you have chosen to join us again, and we're going to begin, as we've been doing, with some songs, allowing people some time to join us.
As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You're my friend and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Time is filled with swift transition, not a birth on earth can stand. Build your hopes on things eternal, hold to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build their hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Trust in him who will not leave you, whatsoever years may bring. If on earthly friends forsaken, still more closely to him cling. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. When your journey is completed, if to God you have been true, then bright the home in glory, your enraptured soul will view. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Dread not the things that are ahead. The burdens break the sinking sands. The thorns that o'er the path are spread. God holds the future in his hands. God holds the future in his hands. His blessed hands. And every heart he understands. He understands. On him depend. On him depend. He is your friend. He is your friend. He holds the future in his hands. We know not what tomorrow brings. A sun or storm like cloud or hail. We only know this here and God's, and He will be our Father still. Live close to Him and trust His love, assured that while on earth we roam, whatever may come, He bends above to guide His children safely home. God holds the future in His hands, His blessed hands, and every heart He understands. He understands. On Him depend. On Him depend. He is your friend. He is your friend. He holds the future in His hands.
Again, welcome everyone. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, beginning in verse 1 to chapter 9 and verse 6. This evening, it's hard to believe that we're almost through the book of Ecclesiastes, but as we've been going through the book, we see how it moves kind of like from this avenue of complete despair to this avenue where there's some practical advice for everyday life, but still keeping the presence of God in mind. And this is where really what Solomon is bringing us towards, as we'll see, teaching us what we can really know, what we can really control about life, what we really can't control. And because of that, finding joy with what God has given us in the meantime. So we're going to be going further along in this. You know, I was thinking, I was reading this week a quote from Nietzsche, and Nietzsche did a lot of things against Christianity, against belief in God. And he left us with a lot of terrible conclusions about life. But one of the things that we discover in people like that is we learn some truth about what life without God really looks like. And even if you were to remove the threat of hell and you remove the promise of heaven and you kind of did like what John Lennon said, right? Imagine there's no heaven, imagine there's no hell. There's still, like, you know, even if there's only life around us, eventually you end up becoming pretty desperate, like Ecclesiastes sounds. And in fact, so Nietzsche said something along the lines like this: he who stares into the abyss long enough has the abyss staring into him. Something like that. Or if you stare too long into the abyss will eventually stare into you. And that's really what you end up discovering, right? If there is no God, life is just a big darkness. It's just an abyss. And what else is there out there, right? What else is there to look forward to? And so you end up becoming pretty distraught over the fact that there's really no destination in life. There's really no purpose in life besides the moment. And that just doesn't really give us much to grab hold of. And one of the things that belief in eternity does, and I think even from in a very basic level, you may have always wanted to do something in life. You may have always wanted to own something in life. You may have always wanted to be able to experience something in life. One of the things that we understand is if you don't get to do that, you have an eternity to enjoy the richest treasures that you could enjoy. And so you really don't get too distraught that you never owned that fancy car, or you don't get distraught you never took that great trip and you didn't experience this, because really we're looking forward to something even better than what we have here. And so that's an important thing. So we can enjoy our limitations here. We can enjoy what we have in our limitations here, because we know that we're going towards a future that is God's future, and there's not going to be the limitations that we know here. So anyways, that's just something I thought that was quite interesting, that we do learn from Nietzsche what the end really is of a life where you just try to force yourself with the conclusion there is no God, there's nothing beyond the grave, and it really becomes just a darkness. One of the things his fellow philosopher Kierkegaard said, who was a believer in God, he said, when you're looking at the abyss, at least you can throw yourself into the loving arms of God when you're looking in the abyss. And that's kind of what Solomon does, perhaps with a little more certainty than what Kierkegaard was mentioning. So anyways, Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 9, verse 6. We're going to break it into three readings, and the first reading is going to be verses 1 through 9. Solomon says, "Who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. For he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? No man has power to retain the spirit, or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt." And so this is some of the things that we understand, and he's repeating some of the earlier teachings, but making some more direct application, right? There's a time and a way for everything, and he talked about that in chapter 3, and he brings it up again in chapter 8. One of the interesting things about this first section is it sounds quite similar to Paul's directions concerning the Christian's role with government in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. It sounds a lot alike what Paul had to say, which brings us to an interesting point, because Paul talks a number of times in ways that are similar to what we read in the book of Ecclesiastes and in the other wisdom books as well. But Ecclesiastes, and we talked about, like, there's none that are righteous, right? There's no one who never sins. And that's what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, that's what Paul says in Romans. And now again, Solomon says, like just do what the king tells you to do, right? Do what he tells you to do, and don't take your stand in an evil cause. And that's kind of similar to, it's pretty similar to what Paul said in Romans chapter 13, about being subject to the authorities or the rulers that be. And what I'm trying to get at here is that perhaps as Christians, if we see these connections that the Apostle Paul and other New Testament writers make with some of these great Old Testament books, is that we need to pay attention to the Old Testament books. What were they saying? What were they teaching? And the overall message of Ecclesiastes so far, right, has been know your limitations, fear God, right? God is God, you're not. And all these things that we pursue to try to find meaning in life, we're going to have to give up eventually, because we're all going to die. And maybe there's some purpose there. And we, of course, know that when Jesus comes, he adds to it, doesn't he? Like, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you, and so on. So anyway, Solomon starts off chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. It sounds like he repeats a lot of things, which he does. But remember, as we said, he kind of adds to his teaching as we go. But who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? And he talks now about the power of wisdom. And as we've been noticing, wisdom has some power. And here in verse 1, Solomon tells us about a certain or specific power wisdom has. A man's wisdom makes his face shine, or makes him cheerful. And his face becomes cheerful. He's not someone who's grimacing or whatever. His face becomes cheerful. He understands things. And so there's a power of wisdom here. And the next line, which is often what happens in wisdom literature, it says it one way and then it says it a different way, but it's the same message. The hardness of his face is changed. The hardness of his face is changed. There are few things as contagious in life as cheerfulness and bitterness. Both things are very contagious, right? Someone who's cheerful, they're contagious. But also someone who's bitter, someone whose face is hardened, they're contagious as well. And we're warned about that, right? We're warned, like, a root of bitterness may rise up and cause trouble to many. That's what was in the book of Hebrews. But this idea that the hardness of his face is changed, makes his face cheerful. And so Solomon gets into the duty before the king, right? Keep the king's command because of God's oath, and don't be hasty to leave his presence, and don't take your stand in an evil cause. And this is important, but it's kind of like practical advice. It's because he does whatever he pleases, and so they have the power. And so this is kind of like just practical advice here, because the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? And really, that's true, right? And so you're not, just do this practical advice. Solomon says in verse 5, and this is so enlightening for us: whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing, right? So you don't want to be punished as evildoers, and this is one of the things the New Testament goes along with. But then it says the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. The wise person understands right timing. And, one of the directions or injunctions in the New Testament, it's in all the Bible, is about being impatient, right? Quick in spirit, being impatient. And one of the things about being impatient is you don't wait for right timing. You may be correct, but you're not waiting for correct timing. And so notice Solomon says the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. He'll know both. He'll know to do the right thing at the right time. And so one of the things sometimes that we need to do, one thing I need to do more often, is I need to be praying to God more and more for wisdom, so that I might know not only what's the right thing to do, but when is the right time to do the right thing. And oftentimes when I'm impatient in my soul, I'm really not good at judging when is the right time to do something, but I'm also not really good at judging what is the right thing when I'm impatient in soul. I jump, all these different things. And so Solomon says, like, the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way, for there is a time and a way for everything. Sometimes there are things that need to be done, and it isn't the right time. Not ready. Jesus was good at that, right? He knew when the right time was certain things. He said to his disciples in the Gospel of John, for instance, I have more things to say to you, but it's not the right time. It will come when it's the right time, and so on. So verse 6, man's trouble lies heavy on him, and he keeps going, and he gets into what seems like a repetition, but it's not really repetition as much as it's adding on to what he earlier said. No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. And so this is one thing that's kind of, you can relate it even to the kingship, but you can relate to all parts of life, is that someone will not be king forever, right? No man has the power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. And wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. And so here is the thing, is that eventually power, no matter how much you have, does nothing for you. Eventually it does nothing for you. And in the beginning of both testaments, and when I'm going to say like the Old Testament begins with Moses because the Old Covenant, and then Jesus, of course, in the Gospel of Matthew. But it's interesting that in the beginning of both, in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 19, God comes to Moses and says, I need you to go down to Egypt. And he says to Moses, one of the things he says is, those who sought your life are dead. They had a lot of power, but they're gone. No man has power over the day of death. And it's interesting that the same thing was said to Jesus' parents or father when Jesus ran off to Egypt with his parents, right? And Joseph is told that those who sought the child's life are dead. Eventually, power does nothing for you. Despite that, at times, if you look at verse 9, at times those in power can inflict great injustice on their subjects. And this is kind of a word of encouragement to all the oppressed. It's not right that they're oppressed. It's not right that injustice is done to them. But notice Solomon says, all this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. Now, the interesting thing here is it to the person's hurt he had power over, or is it to his own hurt? Does someone who have power over another, when they cause injustice, do they actually end up hurting themselves? But the point being is, eventually, power does nothing for you. Eventually, everyone in power will be like everyone else. No one has power over the day of death. Now, that's an important message for any of us, though, isn't it? That not the day of death is coming. It is appointed unto man once to die. It's coming. No one has power over the day of death. And so that brings us into verses 10 through 17, the rest of chapter 8. Solomon says, then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. There is a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. And I commend joy, for man has no good thing under the sun, but to eat and drink and be joyful. For this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. And this, of course, that last line is the despair of people like Nietzsche and others, right? They claim to be able to find it out, and then they realize in the end they don't know. And because they don't know, they're in despair. They find life to be absurd and so on. There's quite a bit here, verses 10 through 17, and it's a fascinating part, as most of the book is. But it's one of those age-old problems, right? Why do good people suffer? And what is the purpose of being good if the wicked prosper and the good end up suffering and so on? And that really is a difficult question at times. It's hard, right? It's hard for us to grapple with that. And we sometimes, when we're on the side of God, we feel like we've got to rush to defend him. But even in our rush to defend God, sometimes we don't really know the answers. One of the things that maybe we can understand is the way Ecclesiastes presents it. And it's something that perhaps we can rest with, is that one of the things, first of all, if our belief is true, and I believe it is, that a righteous God is over all, and if he has not given us the defense of this question, somehow that's all right, and somehow he is all right with it. But one of the things that we learn from Solomon is he doesn't deny God. Even in all of his questions, when he's saying absurd and all these different things, he doesn't deny God. He's wrestling with questions honestly, and as Christians, we can do that. And as Christians, we can allow our non-Christian friends to do that. When we're in conversations with them, honor their questions, right? Because honestly, sometimes they have pretty good questions. And but he doesn't deny God, and he doesn't deny the reality of evil. And this is important, these two things, right? We don't deny God, and we also don't deny the reality of evil. And the third thing he doesn't deny is he doesn't deny the power of God. And so this is interesting, right? We don't deny God. We don't deny his power. But at the same time, we also are realizing that evil is among us. And I read recently, someone said, why didn't God end the war? Whatever war they were talking about. And the person responded, God didn't start the war, right? There is God, and there is his power, and then there is the reality of evil. And so when we wrestle with this, if life was all there was, we might start to wonder if there is such a thing as a fair God. Right? We might start, well, if this is all there is, if all there is to life is from birth to death, then things don't really work out the way they're supposed to work out. Not always. But if there's something more, if there is a good God, if there's a righteous God, looking at all the injustices of life, there has to be something more. And this is kind of where Solomon brings us in verses 10 through 17. He first talks about this hypocrisy of the wicked, right? This inability of us to properly determine. It's, like people using church or whatever to make themselves look good and whatever it might be. But I saw the wicked buried, and they used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city where they had done such things, and they get this burial. And Solomon said, this is vanity. This is stupid. This is useless. To applaud these guys when they're actually wicked is useless, he says. And that, again, Paul picked up on that a little bit. And he goes on and he talks a little bit here, verse 11 through 14. And this is where life can be challenging, because there are people who get away with doing wrong for too long. And you see this because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. And if people who do wrong get ahead, if people who do wrong don't get punished, if people who do wrong never suffer for it, if people who do right suffer the way people who do wrong should, then all of a sudden you might start saying, I'm preparing myself for a life of evil. If it's survival of the fittest, not survival of the right. If it's the strong survive, not the good, we might as well do whatever it takes to get ahead, right? And that's what Solomon sees happening here. And unfortunately, the wise person or the righteous person, their conduct doesn't always come with reward, or at least not the reward in a worldly sense of the matter. Righteous people get done to what wicked people should have done to, and wicked people get the rewards of the righteous. It just doesn't work out the proper way. But notice Solomon still doesn't deny God. And because he doesn't deny God or the power of God, he realizes that the injustice of life can't be the last word on the matter. It can't be he was a good man, he suffered for it and died, and that's it. It can't just be that. If any of you are familiar with Plato's The Republic, that's one of the arguments that his friend Thrasymachus throws against him, that there's no sense being just. People are only just because they get rewarded for it. And Thrasymachus says, if you could get away with wickedness, you would just do wickedness. But notice Solomon won't go that way, because there is a God. And God is good, and God is powerful. And so he says that, right? He says, verse 12, I know it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. I know it, he says. It has to. It has to be well. There has to be something beyond this. And I just don't think about the injustices done to the righteous, but think about the injustices done to the innocent. Think about children who are slaughtered and abused and so on. There has to be something beyond that if there's a God, right? So we don't deny God. We don't deny his power. And because of that, we deny that this is the last word. That's what we deny. So anyways, we keep going for a moment. And again, Solomon goes back to his go-to, right? It's the fifth time that he makes this statement in verse 15. And this time it's a very definitive statement. And this is the fifth time he's brought it up since chapter 3. I commend joy, he says, for man has no good thing under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil that God has given him. So it's the commendation of being joyful, and it's in your toil, right? So you're thankful for those things that we talked about so many times that you could take for granted, right? Your eat, your drink, but you're thankful for your toil. You find joy in the toil, and this is what God has given you in your days and so on, right? The days of his life that God has given him. This is the portion that God has given us under the sun. Under the sun. Under the sun. Remember that, right? Under the sun. Life on earth. It's a pretty big key to where Solomon is going. Life on earth. Under the sun. If this life on earth was all there was, all would be vanity. He goes on, he says in verse 16 and 17, we shouldn't live our life assuming we can know God, assuming we can know the things of God. Right? Even if a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. So that brings us to the last reading, chapter 9, verses 1 through 6, kind of Solomon sounding, but we know that's not. We know he's leading us somewhere else, right? How can it be well with the righteous who fear God and not well with the wicked who don't fear God, if in this life sometimes the wicked receive the righteous rewards and the righteous receive the wicked rewards? It has to be that there's some answer beyond this life. There's some answer somewhere, and Solomon's getting there, right? So chapter 9, verse 1 through 6. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. So it sounds again like this despair note, but again, we're all going to die. There's not going to be anything about us after we're dead. That's just the way it is. It's just not going to happen. It's just what's not going to. We can't control that. But it's not really all that Solomon is saying in verses 1-6. It is true. It's going to happen. So you have this despair that the wicked are getting away with things. You have this despair that the wicked, like they get to do things for too long. And you have this despair that the righteous get somehow punished for being righteous, and the righteous don't receive the rewards that the righteous should receive. And there's some despair here. But notice he says, everyone's going to die. This is going to happen. The same event is going to happen all. And he's already kind of said, right? It'll be well with the righteous who fear God, or the wise who fear God. It won't be well with the wicked who do not fear God. But notice chapter 9 and verse 1. As he begins this, I want us to just notice this a huge verse. All this I laid to heart, Solomon says, examining it all. Right? He's a scientist, right? He's looking at it all. How the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. So notice this for a moment, because he says in verse 14 of chapter 8 that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, right? So he says this, and we observe that. Someone does what's right, someone does what's honorable, and they get nailed for it. What happened to them should never have happened. And the prime example, of course, is Jesus, right? And when he's threatened, he doesn't threaten back. People criticize him. He doesn't go and criticize them. All these different things, right? All these things. And they hit him and they beat him and they spit on him and they crucify him. And Jesus never goes back on them and so on. So this righteous person, Jesus, the righteous one, but there's others like that, right? There's people who are sweet and innocent, and their houses get broken into and different things, all sorts of things, right? So he says that in chapter 8 and verse 14, which might make us think he's concluding again. What's the point of it all? It's all absurd. It's all stupid. It's all meaningless. It's all vain. But now he says in chapter 9 and verse 1, the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. All this I laid to heart, examining it all. And this is huge. The deeds of the righteous and wise are in the hands of God. So a righteous man or a righteous woman does righteous deeds, and they get paid according to the wicked, right? But that's not God who's paying them. The righteous and the wise person's deeds are in the hand of God. But it's not just their deeds that are in the hand of God. They themselves are in God's hands. They themselves are in God's hands. In 1 Peter chapter 2, when Peter talks about the example of Jesus, about these people went after Jesus and he didn't go back after them, right? When he was reviled, he did not revile in return, so on, so on. What did Jesus do instead? And Peter says he entrusted himself to the one who judges righteously. And he knew he was in the hands of God, who judges righteously. So Solomon is reminding us again, both the righteous and the wicked are going to die. This is what's going to happen. Just because the wicked don't get paid appropriately doesn't mean that they're going forever here. Everyone's going to die. So this is going to happen. He says, while we're on earth, sometimes it seems so absurd that wicked people get paid righteous people's rewards and righteous people get paid wicked people's rewards. And it seems so absurd. But he also says earlier on, I know that it will be well with those who fear God because they fear before him. So, and he says, I know it won't be well with the wicked because he does not fear before God. When you put all that together, how can it be well with the righteous who fear God, despite the fact that they get paid according to wicked people's deeds, and despite the fact that they die just like the wicked do? And the only answer could be, or at least one answer is, because the righteous are in the hands of God. The righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hands of God. And so this is a wonderful encouragement when it seems so bleak. What we see here never has the last word. And even if the wicked get a righteous man's burial, it's just absurd. It's not the last word. And so we're going to pick it up with Solomon, and he has some more practical advice, but it's really righteous advice next week. And next week, we're going to do something a little different. A new word I learned is asynchronously, I think it is. I'll be doing this, taping it beforehand and releasing it at 7:30 next week. And a bit of good news is Sarah and my 25th anniversary. And so we're going to be celebrating it as best we can anyways. And so we'll be having a tape, but it won't be live next week. So you'll be able to come on the channel at 7:30, and or you can play it whenever you want after 7:30 next week. But so anyways, just give you a heads up on that. Couple of things I mentioned before. Unfortunately, a young person in Amherstburg at school already tested positive. Was the first case in school, and we do want to pray for all of our students, all of our parents and teachers, and all those involved in the education system. I know the difficulties that some are facing. We have a young family across the street, and they're having difficulty with what's going on. They don't know what to do. And we want to empathize with that. The coronavirus seems to be picking up a little bit, especially in the Toronto area, and we want to pray for them. One of our daughter Bailey's friends recently tested positive. His name's Hayu, found out today that he tested positive for COVID. We do want to continue to remember all those. Rick Liebrock is hoping to have a date for his hernia surgery soon. It's been quite a while that he's been battling that, so we want to keep that in our prayers and continue to remember all those that we're thinking about, especially our friends and neighbors. And anyways, bow with me in a word of prayer. Father God, we are so thankful for you. We're thankful that you give us so much treasure to look forward to. You give us so much pleasure in this life as well, Father. Help us to be a grateful people for the great things that you have given us. There's so many in our world, Father, who do not have the things that some of us have, and help us not take these things for granted. Help us to be able to use them for your glory, Father. Father, please be with our friends and loved ones who are struggling at this time, and some are sorrowing over the death of loved ones. Some are facing difficult times ahead with surgery and treatments, Father. Continue to be with us. Continue to be with our friends and our neighbors. It is through Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless everyone.